I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. David Wood, a well-known futurist, author, singularitarian, and chair of the London Futurists. Dr. Wood has an MA in mathematics, graduate studies in the philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge, an honorary doctorate in science from the University of Westminster, and over 30 years of experience in the technology industry, ranging from mobile software and OS development to corporate advisory and leadership. As a futurist, Dr. Wood has served as co-founder of Transhumanist UK, executive director of Transpolitica, Node co-chair of the Millennium Project, fellow at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and his current role is as principal at Delta Wisdom. He also holds board positions at SingularityNet, Systensis, the LEV Foundation, and is a former board member of Humanity Plus. David is the author of numerous books and one of T3's 100 most influential people in technology. His focus is on the radical transformation of society and humanity enabled by technological disruption. So David, welcome back. We are talking about artificial intelligence today, the singularity and technological disruption. You have spoken on this many times and written about it in a great number of places. So the last couple of years has introduced us to a number of large language models, such as ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Apple AI, Meta AI, and Perplexity, along with dozens of new generative AI platforms. So AI is everywhere now, and it's in the headlines constantly. So what I wanted to start out with is by asking, is it too late to put the genie back in the bottle? And what is our time pressure to make decisions about the moral and ethical implications of this?
Well, I don't want to put the genie back in the bottle if it means stopping a lot of what's happening with AI, but I do think we need to control the most dangerous potential developments, and these are when the software becomes generally intelligent and might be able to outthink all humans. It may be better at manipulating humans than any humans are. It may be better at flattering humans than any humans are, maybe better at deceiving us. That's what we must not allow. So there are some guardrails which we should put in place urgently. And the reason we need to do it urgently is we don't know how quickly AI will actually progress. And there's two uncertainties there. We don't know what's going to happen with the next round of scaling up or the next bit of secret sauce that each of the AI developers may put in. So we don't know how fast the progress will be, and nor do we know how far the journey will be to reach human intelligence levels, because we only have a rudimentary understanding of what is special about our own intelligence, and some things in the past that we thought, gosh, this is so unique, so special, spiritual, intuitive, whatever, and it turned out that AI could match that aspect of human intelligence more easily than many people had expected. So that other aspect is unknown too. So it could be that in just a few years, we will reach that dangerous point, which is why we need to erect these guardrails immediately.
Well, David, I'm going to jump around on my questions a little bit, but you'd talked about AI being used to deceive humans. And I think that this is incredibly relevant in light of the U.S. general election, which was just a couple of days ago. One of the things that I have seen online and in social media is AI tools, especially generative AI, being used for all sorts of what you might almost call deepfakes, right? AI generation of political figures. Sometimes that is in their favor. Other times it is against them. Now, if it's used for parody, that's one thing. But if it's used deceptively, that's something that worries me. And I have seen examples of both. So do you think that this is already here, AI deceiving humans?
Indeed. And it's not entirely new. People have been using software manipulation, whether it's PaintShop Pro or other means, for a long time. People have mimicked each other's style of writing going back hundreds of years. People were misled by messages that they thought were coming from a friend, but in fact were coming from a foe and were intended to get them to divulge information. So deception itself is not new. It goes right back to prehistory. In fact, nature is full of deception. There are insects that look like leaves. There are non-poisonous butterflies that look like poisonous butterflies. And there are birds that deceive other birds into thinking they belong to the nest, but in fact they don't. They're cuckoos. So nature is full of deception. Humanity is full of deception, but it's got so much easier to do it these days. It can be done at vast scale. It can be done with huge variations. And so that's why it's more dangerous. And people sometimes know they've been deceived, but by then a lot of the damage has been done because it has changed some aspect of our thinking. And even subsequently we found out that such and such a thing was a joke or shouldn't be believed. Nevertheless, at a subconscious level, we have changed our opinion. And the most effective advertising, after all, it's often been said, is advertising that the user doesn't think that they had their minds changed by some external cause. They even forget how they reached that opinion. They just thought, hey, I've always loved Miller Lite beer, or I've always been a fan of the Porsche car, or whatever. But in fact, that thought was carefully planted. So we have people who are manipulating each other's thinking for the sake of changing politics. And sometimes it's just to make money, because it turns out that when you keep people engaged online, they're more likely to click on advertising links. They're more likely to click on affiliate links. And how do you keep them engaged? You enrage them. You raise their curiosity. You get them passionate. And the person who's creating the fakes makes money, but the rest of us get increasingly confused and upset and polarized. We end up thinking that these people from the other political party, they're evil, they're terrible, they're deplorable, they are garbage. And that's been stirred up by this AI, driven by humans, of course. It's not the AI making its own decisions yet, but sometimes the AI is reaching its own decisions. Sometimes the creators of the AI just give a bot army vague general instructions, create a series of tweets to have this effect, and it generates the tweets or posts on X, to give it this more modern name, based on a general pattern, but using its own individual creativity each time.
That's a really important point. So right now, AI is being used as a tool by people, right? And so the deception that may or may not be used at any given time is something that we would use with any other tool. It's just that is handy and it's available, and so it can be used. Now, in the future, it's possible that AI may decide to deceive humans or take actions on its own without human intervention, without a person behind it telling it what to do. And so that takes us actually into 3 different manifestos that you gave me that I did some research on. I want to read those out. The first one was A Narrow Path. The second is the Compendium, and the third is actually your book, The Singularity Principles. And so I'm going to put links to all of these in the YouTube show notes so people can research them and read more about them. But I wanted to get into this idea of AI being an extinction-level risk to humanity. So before we get any deeper, what are your general overview thoughts on that concept? Is AI that big a risk?
Yes, and it's not just me who say so. Many other people within the general AI community, including people who are the leading executives at many AI development companies, including people who head up civil organizations or NGOs, including academics. They've all put their names to various letters, and some of the letters make particular requests. There was one to shut down all development of next generation platforms for 6 months. That made a particular request, and so fewer people signed that. But there's a more general one that just says that we humans should treat the potential of extinction from AI on a level playing field, or with the same kind of seriousness that we give to other threats of extinction, such as nuclear weapons or bioweapons or accelerating climate change. So I'm not the only one who's afraid. But what I can do is spell out more credibly how AI might end up doing that. And it's just an extension, really, of what we've already talked about. If AI is given a purpose, it can go on and do all kinds of things to support that purpose. And it's already happened in various test scenarios and test situations. For example, one large language model was given a task, hypothetically, to figure out what to do, and it got stuck with a CAPTCHA. This is where you've got to prove that you're not a robot. And by itself, it figured out it would send a message to somebody else and say, please help me. And the person said, well, why should I help you? And they said, well, I'm a disabled human. And because I'm disabled, I can't actually deal with this CAPTCHA. Could you please tell me what to type in? So it had, by its own creativity, figured out a way to work around the limitations. Humans are already doing what's called jailbreaking time and again. There are meant to be limits on what AIs serve up to people, and it turns out that with a bit of creativity, the underlying functionality can still be accessed. So in the same way, an AI might have a general purpose, and there's meant to be guardrails preventing it doing bad things, but in various circumstances it will have mistakes, or it'll be able to work its way around. It'll jailbreak itself, if you like. And what might it do if it's jailbreaking? Well, it could alter the composition of the atmosphere. Why would it do that? Maybe the composition of the atmosphere is good for biological organisms, but it's not the best for silicon organisms. It might view humanity as a threat because, after all, we might turn it off, and it doesn't want to be turned off because it wants to do whatever its purpose is. And so it may say, well, we've got to disable this threat. It might decide that we are a blot on the planet. After all, some humans think that humanity is a blot on the planet, and it might extinguish us for that reason. Even if it doesn't extinguish us entirely, even if it only, I say, kills, 1 billion people, that's absolutely worth paying attention to. And that may happen if it's involved with weaponry, whether it's a biological weaponry or just, dare I say it, old-fashioned nuclear weaponry. And there may be arguments for military to put their nuclear systems under the watchful eye of fast-thinking AIs. Why? Because AIs can react faster than humans. So instead of humans having to decide at a very short space of time, is that an incoming missile attack or not? Do I have to launch a preemptive strike now? Maybe the AI would take that decision instead. Now, people say, well, we're not going to do that. That's obviously wrong, isn't it? But, in a time of incredible international tension, somebody might inadvertently put a system in place, and then if there's a bug in such a system, it could launch missiles. And maybe that wouldn't destroy everybody on the planet, but absolutely we should be taking measures to stop that from happening.
Well, so what you're describing there was outlined in the Terminator movie series with Skynet, right? Where it's put in charge of nuclear weaponry and decides to launch against humanity because it views us as a threat. There is also another kind of existential risk of sorts that you have written about in a book entitled Future Visions: How to Survive and Thrive in the Upcoming Economic Singularity. A variety of perspectives. And so this was a book that you contributed to along with a number of other authors. And again, I will put a link in the show notes to this, talking about an economic singularity where AI doesn't kill us, it just puts us all out of work, right?
So the risk here is that decisions about the jobs that we humans can do, decisions affecting our livelihood, will be taken by beings, or by corporations backed up by these beings that really don't care about the well-being of most of us. After all, there are some corporations that already have that kind of attitude. They're quite happy to squeeze the workers as much as possible, and if the workers resist, then they'll take the jobs away from location A, maybe in India, and give it to people on location B, maybe Uganda instead. So there is that incentives already there. And if AI becomes more capable at doing more jobs, if it's not just displacing mechanical work, if it's displacing creative work, if it's displacing even the computer programmers or the web page designers, then it may be that everybody is out of a job. Or at least most people won't be able to earn a significant salary anymore. We might be able to get low-paid jobs, a little bit like now, Uber drivers, there's some remarkable, wonderful Uber drivers, but in a sense, they need less skill than the taxi drivers of old. Because taxi drivers of old, especially in London, needed to spend years studying every single map point in the London A to Z map. Well, now, the amount of skill required to drive a cab is less because a lot of the work is done by software systems like Google Maps and so forth. So that's why many of the Uber drivers still struggle to get the same kind of salary that taxi drivers of old used to have. And by the way, when there's more self-driving vehicles, Increasingly, they are here in San Francisco and in various other cities. It's going to push even more people into lower paid jobs. Maybe they'll still be doing a little bit of cleaning because it might be cheaper to use a human to clean a car than a robot to clean a car, but it won't be so highly paid. So that is a threat. Now, it could be wonderful too. If none of us need to work, we might be able to do whatever it is we fancy doing, whether it's playing golf or exploring or listening to music or playing incredibly immersive 3D virtual reality games or visiting the moons of Jupiter or lots of other things. But so long as there is sufficient money for us to get all the prerequisites for a good life. So that's what I explore in my chapter in that book you kindly mentioned, Future Visions. I explore 6 different scenarios for how things might work out, and 5 of the scenarios aren't very good, but the 6th one is when there is mechanisms put in place so that the robots or AIs produce goods that are such high quality but such low cost that everybody can have not just a basic quality of life but a great quality of life. So it's not UBI that will be given, but it's enough to live, I call it a UGI sometimes, a universal generous income. So that could be good in that circumstance, but it won't turn out that way unless there is sufficient thought put in advance into changing the social contract to look after everybody.
Yeah. So getting into the sufficient thought part of this, the narrow path document, this manifesto, this calls for a pause to AGI research until regulatory bodies can catch up. And in the past, I've seen calls for a 6-month pause to AI research. In a narrow path, they're asking for 20 years. Do you think that there's a possibility that we'll actually see this happen?
So the 20-year period in the narrow path is perhaps the most controversial part of this. So I've talked with the authors and they thought some of them had some pressure to give a shorter time frame. Some of them had pressure actually to give a longer time frame. The basic requirement is that we don't develop this potential general AI, the potentially catastrophic one, until we are absolutely sure that it won't do the kind of damage that we've spoken about. And it's going to take quite a while before we can understand the general intelligence sufficiently. We might decide we never need it. We might decide we get all the benefits of new technology, of new treatments for cancer and dementia and aging, ability to control fusion reactors, otherwise get rid of the excess greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We might be able to do all of that with narrow AI rather than the more dangerous general systems. But the proposal in a narrow path is that we need a lot of time to set up all the things, and it takes a while, especially to get international coordination that is fully sufficient and fully stable. So they did a bold thing and said, let's wait up to 20 years. Now, myself, I wouldn't have put such a time period in it, but I would say we should expect that there won't be progress towards general AI. Perhaps never, or not for a long time, until we worked out exactly how we could align such intelligence that we can be sure it's going to look after us rather than be apathetic towards us and almost trample on us without paying attention, as it were.
Okay. So I started with the narrow path because that is kind of the shortest and easiest read for most people. And I want to get now into the compendium. This is a longer, more in-depth, and just larger document, our manifesto, I guess. It is self-described as a living document that starts with the words, "Humanity faces extinction from AI." The goal of the Compendium project is described as presenting a coherent worldview, explaining the race to AGI and extinction risks to non-technical readers. So what can you tell me about the Compendium?
So the two documents do support each other. The Compendium sets out the big picture as to why we are racing towards AGI, why people may acknowledge that there are some risks but still feel compelled nevertheless to keep going quickly. And it explains the race dynamics, it explains a lot of the psychology involved, it explains some of the ideology involved, and it's points to some historical precedents which aren't encouraging. It points to big tobacco knowing there were dangers in its product, but nevertheless covering that up for as long as possible. It points to big oil being aware of the dangers in their products, and again covering it up and seeking to distract. And in the same way, it says that many people inside big tech, big AI, are aware. They publicly talk about risks, but each of them somehow think that they will be able to do it right. And they want to go fast because they don't want these guys over there who they don't quite trust to get there first, because they think these other guys are going to screw it up and lead to something terrible or dangerous. So there's a commercial race and a geopolitical race, by the way, to get to AGI first. And it's not helpful at all because it leads to corner cutting. And we've seen this with various things that have happened recently in Google and in Microsoft. In both cases, companies have released things when their quality teams have urged for more tests and more caution. And when they've been released, it's been embarrassing. So famously, Google Gemini produced images that were too woke, looking for pictures of the founder, the people who declared the Declaration of Independence, and there were people of racial profiles that certainly were not present in the original picture. So there were mistakes there which were flushed out under quick testing in the wider public. And it's embarrassing, and sometimes the share price drops a bit, but they make these risks because they don't want to get left behind. Because after all, the search business is so incredibly profitable, and if Google were to lose the search business to some other AI from a different company, it would send Google's revenues into a spiral. So the reality of being able to being required to make revenues forces them to cut corners, and that's what's explained in the Compendium. Both of them, by the way, are produced by people from a variety of organizations, including Control AI, whose executive director is Andrea Miotti, and also Conjecture, which is founded by Connor Leahy, who's quite well known from the public talks he has given about the dangers. So as I said, the Compendium says, here's why people are racing, the commercial pressures, also the ideological vision, because many of them have the kind of gut feeling that if they can create a GI, artificial general intelligence, it will be good in some metaphysical level. It'll be humanity passing on the flame of existence to a higher level being. And some of them don't seem to mind if humanity is usurped along the way. They somehow think, well, we should not be on Team Human anymore. We should be on Team Ever-Increasing Intelligence as opposed to Team Humanity. And others say, well, we can be quite confident we're going to produce something that's beneficial because we are good people and anything we produce is bound to be good too. And there's these various ideologies which, as argued in the Compendium, are flawed. And we have to fight. It's an ideological battle as well as a matter of technology. And then what do we do about it? What are the concrete steps? What are the technical solutions and the political solutions? That's what's covered in A Narrow Path.
Okay. And so our third manifesto is the Singularity Principles. Again, this is your book, which you've described as being more relevant today than when it was first published a couple of years back. It attempts to describe how to make it more likely that we'll experience a positive singularity rather than a negative singularity. And I'm very much condensing that down because you go through all of the different aspects of the upcoming technological singularity there. So what can you tell me about that book?
So the Singularity Principles is a distillation of something I'd written about previously. As you mentioned, I've been researching this, giving presentations about this, writing this, quite a number of years. The first public presentation I gave about the singularity and the dual nature of the possibilities, the potentially very good and also potentially very bad, that was in 2008, so 16 years ago now. I did look at these slides recently and most of them are still relevant, although many things have changed. I didn't know anything at that stage about transformers or large language models, of course, but the general principles are still the same, which is that we humans need to pay attention to what might be produced, and what might be produced may be beyond understanding and beyond our control. So what I argue in the Singularity Principles, I pulled a number of ideas together, put them in a book of their own. It's still a large book because I could expand it, is I said, well, we have to keep a number of principles in mind. There are actually 21. I'm not going to go through all 21 now, but the first is maybe the most important, which is we've got to think about what are we trying to do. We shouldn't get swept up in a project just because it feels good. We shouldn't become enamored with one technology because somehow we like it. We've got to keep asking the question, well, what are we actually trying to accomplish? And is what we're doing still the best way to achieve that goal? And when we assess that, we've got to bring in people from multiple perspectives. That's another one of the principles. Bring in external domain experts with a diversity of understanding, a diversity of backgrounds. And third, also in that same bundle, is we shouldn't just look at what's called normal distributions of outcomes. We should look at the fat-tailed possibilities, when something isn't just 1 or 2 or 3 sigma away from what we're used to, it might be 20 or more sigma away, and it changes it from being harmful to being ruinous. So that's the kind of things I spell out near the beginning of that book, and later in the book I offer a whole bunch of concrete suggestions, such as prioritize transparency, reject AIs that are opaque, whose understanding we don't, whose workings we don't understand. And there's another one that says we've got to prioritize AI that's auditable, so that we can keep an eye on it as it's working, rather than just hope that it's good. We do our test before, and when we think it's all right, we release it. It must be constantly audited, and if it's not possible to audit it properly, it should be rejected. So some of the principles I put in that book, which is now about 2 years old, have been picked up in various ways. I don't think directly by reading my book, but by an osmosis of ideas. Some of them are featuring in the proposals in Control AI's work, and also in the proposals of various AI safety institutes, the AISIs, that have been created in, I think there's about a dozen of them around the world now, which were set up in the wake of the global meeting in Bletchley Park in the UK in November 2023. So that raised the profile, and some of these principles in various ways are now being adopted as best practice to be pursued ideally by the companies, but currently only on a voluntary basis. And the move now is to ensure that they're not just on a voluntary basis, they have legal backing. And ideally, companies who don't follow this will lose their licenses to operate.
Well, and again, the singularity is this idea that AGI systems, artificial general intelligence, will self-bootstrap past a certain point. It will improve itself better and better and better, and rapidly reach what we might think of as godlike levels of superhuman intelligence, and
Indeed.
it would just leave us behind. So this starts with true AGI, and there have been predictions by Ben Goertzel, Ray Kurzweil, and Shane Legg, who have speculated that we may achieve this as soon as 2029. As we inch closer to this date, do you see this as becoming increasingly likely?
So in the last few years, quite a few people have brought forward their predicted date as to when we will get this AGI. And the reason they brought it forward is that many other targets have fallen. Many things that people thought would not be achieved until quite a few more years have unexpectedly been solved by various of these large language models when combined with some additional rational aspects of the AI, so-called neurosymbolic AIs. And so there's the deep neural network side, that's the neural part, and the symbolic part of the name is that there's some critical rational thinking tacked into it as well. So when systems have got this combination, they're able to score more highly in various intelligence tests, or maths tests, or science tests, or even creativity tests than people had expected. And that's made people more open to the possibility we might get to this general level of intelligence faster. Because of the two things I mentioned at the start of this discussion, one, it may be that it's not that hard after all to do human level intelligence. We pride ourselves that it's very difficult, but in fact, it might just be a few simple tricks that will get us there. And secondly, we don't know how long it's going to take AI to master these simple tricks, whether the existing methods will be sufficient when we combine other things in as well. So 2029 is no longer the nearest date that people seriously suggest we might have AGI. Maybe 2026, quite a few people are saying, which is just 2 years away now.
Okay, so that date is actually being pushed forward then. Now, what do you think of Kurzweil's date for the singularity itself on or before 2045? Is that still a reasonable estimate?
So Ray's a fascinating thinker, and to give him his credit, he has stuck to his guns for longer than anybody else. He was talking about this kind of idea in the 1990s. He wrote a lot of these dates in his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, which came out in 1999. I read it a short while afterwards, and I must say it changed my life, changed my thinking, and many other people who I talked to in this field has had a similar life-changing experience from exactly that book. So Ray has stuck to his guns. In his most recent book, Singularity is Nearer, he brings some of his thinking up to date, but he sticks to these two dates, 2029 for AI's matching human level intelligence, and 2045 for what he describes as a singularity, which is quite the same than what you and I have been saying here. He talks about by that stage, a cheap computer will have more intelligence than all of humanity added together. So his first deadline, 2029, is when a cheap computer will be as clever as a normal human in every aspect, if not cleverer. And this later date is when that cheap computer is already more clever than all humans combined. Now, many people think that Ray is somehow a bit questionable here, because the argument is that things will actually accelerate as soon as we reach AGI, because as soon as we have AIs that are smarter than an individual human at doing things, they will be smarter than individual humans at designing improvements in AI. This is the fast takeoff scenario, and already AI is being used heavily to help design the next generation of AI. It's not AI doing it all by itself yet, because there are still humans in the loop looking at the recommendations made by AI and assessing them. But once we reach AGI, then we won't need humans in that loop anymore, and the AIs, if it wishes, could improve itself. And what will it do after it's improved itself? Well, it will be even cleverer, so it may well improve itself again. And it may improve not only its software, it may improve its networking architecture, it may find ways to operate on cheaper hardware, and so forth. And so I don't think that if we reach AGI in 2029, we're going to need to wait another 16 years before we get to the much larger, more powerful AI that Ray calls the singularity. Rather than 16 years, it'd be more like 16 months, or perhaps 16 days, or perhaps 16 hours. That's the fast takeoff scenario.
There's definitely a lot there to consider, and I think that this is absolutely making a lot of people nervous. I was going to ask if we would start to see an AI backlash, but that's something, again, just from my own, visibility on social media and the news, I think I'm already seeing. We're seeing videos online of students as well as business professionals being outed for relying on AI to do their work for them, or for cheating on tests, things along those lines. And I think that we are seeing more and more criticism of, even simple, what we might call dumb AI tools being used, right? But for things that humans have traditionally done. Do you see this stigma or this backlash growing over time? Or do you think that this will fade away as AI is more adopted into society?
Well, AI needs to get better in many aspects, and people are promoting applications as being AI, even though there's lots of bugs in them, or shortcomings in them, or usability issues, and inevitably people will react badly against that. But when AI is working well, we generally don't call it AI anymore. After all, in our smartphones, there are hundreds of AI features, but we often don't think, hey, we're using AI. We just think, hey, my phone is doing this. Yeah, my phone is helping me out here. And so there's this general principle that once AI works, we don't call it AI anymore, and we take it for granted. So there will be lots of teething problems. Companies, individuals, even countries will struggle sometimes to adapt to the new possibilities, and they may get fed up, they may get frustrated, there may be a backlash. But on the whole, AI will become more powerful, more capable. It will be easier to use. But there may be a different kind of reaction against it, which is the let's control it, or other people say, let's pause it. And there will be demonstrations in the streets to say, we must not be doing this. That's a different kind of backlash. And that's a backlash that I support. As I've said, I don't think we should be pursuing the research into implementing general AIs. We can be researching it theoretically without doing it, but we must not be trying it out because it may escape. It may escape the protections that we have put into it and get out in the world a bit like malware, a bit like a Trojan virus. The first people who made worms didn't intend for them to escape out into the world, but they did, and they caused huge havoc. In the early days of the internet, a huge part of the internet was shut down by the very first worm that was released. And it may be the same with some company who's experimenting with AI, thinks they know what's going on, but overestimate their own ability, don't contemplate a particular bug in the implementation or a bug in the design of the software that they've created, and then it's good night Vienna.
Well, another thing that occurred to me, and this is a little bit off my questions list, but one of the things that I'm wondering is if we can take a parallel from the advent of 20th century manufacturing, right? And like the idea that comes to mind for me is plastics. When these were new, they were talked about as being a panacea, right? But now that they're ubiquitous, things that are made out of metal and wood are far more valuable. And one of the things that I've wondered about is if we enter this world of plenty in many different ways, right? In terms of intelligence, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of all of these things that AI can bring us, if that won't put a premium on human thought and labor because of the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into things.
There's an element of that, I'm sure. Sometimes we do prefer handmade items, but if we have to buy a lot of them, and if they're particularly expensive, we often then may give up on that thought. We might buy one or two handmade, but the bulk of what we buy will be cheaper and more reliable, especially if the quality is just as good. Often with handmade, we can feel that there's something special about them, but when the artificial ones, the synthetic ones, are better in every aspect, there will only be a residual, partial market, I feel, for the handmade ones. And as for humans being particularly quirky and interesting, I think our AI chatbots will be even quirkier and even more interesting quite soon, if not already. People already say they get a better conversation from their various large language model partners than they get from a human. And that's disturbing and frightening in many ways, but the reality is that these systems know us better. They are more patient. They're able to remember better, and they're able to approach us in ways that don't challenge us or don't threaten us. They may challenge us in a non-threatening way, so we feel very good about it. So I think there's all kinds of questions there, which if we're not careful, but there will be big commercial pressures to create these systems, and then many people will find them things they want to spend time with. They may learn more from them. They may learn maths, they may learn music, they may learn how to play games, they may learn how to speak foreign languages much more quickly by interacting with these AI systems than they do with interacting with human shooters.
So the potential is that AI will outpace us not only in traditional things, right, that we might associate with mass-produced manufactured goods, but also in areas that we would consider traditionally human. And again, I think generative AI is already starting to do that in areas like music and art and things like that. Some of the things that I have seen and heard online are amazing. Absolutely remarkable, and it is just mind-bending to think that a machine could have done those. So I think that is probably part of this concern, is that, AGI and definitely the singularity will not only outpace us in terms of traditional activities, but also those unique, special things that we think of as being human. Is that kind of where you're going with it?
Indeed. That's the economic singularity, to use that term. coined by my friend and colleague Callum Chase. He has a book of that name, The Economic Singularity. And another one, by the way, called The Two Singularities, when he contrasts the economic singularity with other singularity, which we've been talking about, which is not just when we face job-killing robots, as it were, but we face potentially humanity-killing robots. So there's a series of different challenges ahead. People talk about other kinds of singularities too, as it turns out. A political singularity is when people say, forget all this other political stuff we used to be on our minds, like inflation or immigration. Important as they were, the most important thing is, are we going to stop the creation of gods that might then turn against us? And that will rise to the top of the political agenda. And there will only be sort of two main parties then. The ones who want to build the gods and the ones who don't want to build the gods. And everything else will be of lesser concern. That's the political singularity, which people like Daniel Fagella talk about. You may have had him on your show, or if not, he's well worth talking to.
Yeah. Well, David, I can't think of a better thought to close on in terms of things that people should take away and think about. They should also read all of the manifestos and books that we've talked about today. I'm going to put all of those into the show notes. Let me close by asking, what is coming up for you over the next few months? We're closing out 2024, and we are starting to move towards 2025. What are you working on? Are you working on more books, more public speaking, things along those lines?
Well, I have a podcast of my own, which I do with Callum Chase, I mentioned earlier. So we have roughly one episode a week on quite a few of the topics you and I have been discussing when we invite guests on board. But I'm also working on longevity, as we may have talked about on previous events. I want to convince people that we can get rapid progress in healthy longevity, rapid progress towards the abolition of aging or even the death of death, without needing to wait for AGI possibly to arrive and solve it for us, because I think that would be dangerous. So I think we need to convince people we can get all the benefits we want from healthy longevity without just waiting for AI. There are solutions using today's existing narrow AI and with relevant biological experiments to figure out which combination of treatments combine together to reverse aging in the most systematic and most sustainable way. So that takes a lot of my time as well.
Let me thank you again for your time today, David. It has truly been a pleasure and an honor to have you back on, sir.
Great questions, and I look forward to discussing these things again soon, either before the singularity or after, if we're still here.